So, my greatest hope is that we will stand in the light and be seen as we are, that we will allow ourselves to stand in the light, to go out into a world that sometimes feels dark and say that we have a choice because we can be the light. And when we be the light, people see the light and the world becomes more of what it already is. And so that's my hope today. So I'm gonna start off a little bit different. In between services, a former parishioner who might be watching now because I sent them the link to this, reached out to me and asked me what I meant sometime back when I said that grief is the soul healing. And then they asked me, what is the soul? And I said, I gotta go give a talk in like 15 minutes. But in short, I said, when we grieve, we are acknowledging the fullness of life. We grieve to the degree that we love and open ourselves to joy. The soul, in my experience, is the fullest expression of who we are as reflections of God, as God is. Beyond personality and the desire to protect ourselves from being hurt or disappointed, the soul is God reflecting upon the world through us as an individual expression of all that is. And that just kind of came out. And I know that when I served that church, if somebody asked me that same question, I would have avoided saying that. Even though that's what I thought and that's what I believed, I would have avoided saying it because I would have felt that I kind of would be putting myself in an awkward place when the context of a lot of the way we talk about God and ourselves and all these things is built on this foundation that someone is less than, that something is lacking in us, that there's something that has to come outside of us and fix us because we're so irredeemably broken that there's not enough fixing, but then we still want to get fixed again and again and again. And my soul knows that that's not true. And so I'm grateful to this space and this place and this time and this moment that we can talk like this, because I think these kinds of conversations need to happen. So, backing up, a couple of days ago, I met with a friend I hadn't hung out with in a couple years. They had moved away, and then I ran into him and was like, what are you doing in town? I thought you moved away. And we decided to get together. And the friend told me what he wanted to check in with me about. And I said, oh, no. It was because what he wanted to talk about was things that would evoke the desire to complain. And I knew that, and for those of you who aren't, who have just been here for the first time, aren't familiar, a lot of us in this community are reading this book called A Complaint-Free World by Will Bowen. It says, stop complaining and start living. And not only did I know that I was reading this book and I'm wearing this bracelet, this complaint-free bracelet, I also knew I was giving this talk on Sunday, and I was like, okay, how am I gonna be in this conversation without complaining? Because some of the things that we were talking about are typically complaint-worthy. Some of it is about things that are happening in our community, Boulder County, et cetera, some things historically and some things in present. And then some of it was about things like what are happening in the world, like what's happening in Mississippi with the Nolan Wells case and this mystery about what happened to this young teenager who went out boating with his friends and the only one that hasn't returned. And I grew up right down like 10, 15 miles away from where Nolan Wells died and used to go to his town to get tater nut donuts. And his town, when I took my wife there, I was like, if I ever get cursed to live in Mississippi again, his town was the town I would have wanted to be cursed to go to. It was like the Boulder of Mississippi, right? And so I felt, if I talked with my friend, that there was no way I was going to be able to avoid saying things that evoked emotion and energy and this, desire to complain. So I told him in advance, I said, listen, man, when I start talking to you, I may talk kind of strange because I'm doing this thing, and I had the book with me, just so you know. I'm reading this book, I'm doing this thing, I have this bracelet on, I don't want to switch wrists because with the 21-day challenge of this book, every time you complain, you have to start back at day 1. And at this point, I was at day 10. This was the longest stretch I had done so far. So I didn't want to mess it up. So when he would say something, I'd be like, wait, hold on. how do I say this? And it was a whole thing. But to his credit, he went through it with me. It was like a person trying to figure out how to speak a language, And I was just like, how do you say, And I just going through that whole thing. And then he listened to me. He was patient with me. And then he go, okay, now I'm going to complain. And he went straight to it, And he said it the way he had to say it. And we navigated it. And I thought a lot about, why is it that way? Because it was like this strange conversation, But I didn't want to break my streak. And I was doing good until yesterday. So now I'm like on day one again. And I complained about the weather. Of all the things I could have complained about, to waste my complaint, I said, it's too dang hot. Then I was like, no! I didn't have to say it that way. I could have been like, it's objectively warm. But I said it the way I said it, and I wanted to stand my integrity, so I switched my bracelet. And I did what I had to do. But Bowen, in the part of the series where we are now, he talks about this level of mastery that we can get to if we make the 21 days. And he says that it takes 4 to 8 months to make it to a 21-day streak. And when we get to that place, we come to this level that is called unconscious competence. Unconscious competence. Now, when you hear that at first, it just kind of doesn't sound like they go together. Like, how can you be competent and unconscious? So to give you an example, how many of y'all seen The Karate Kid? Yeah, most people. And even if you haven't heard it, you've seen Wax On, Wax Off, right? Okay, so Ralph Macchio, Daniel's son, he learned unconscious competence because he was waxing, was waxing on, waxing on, waxing on, waxing on. But he didn't know he was learning how to block until he got frustrated and he complained to Miyagi. And he was like, I'm here and I'm going to learn karate. All I know how to do is wash your car and clean your floors. And then Miyagi's like, wax on, wax off, wax on. And he's like, I'm competent. But that's what it is that competence that exists within you, but you don't even have to think about it anymore because it's just a part of who you are, like riding a bike or complaining. And so he talks about being unconsciously competent about non-complaining, and that you get to a certain point where it's just how you are, where you just don't do it anymore. Like when I stopped drinking coffee. I stopped drinking coffee like 6.5 years ago or more to try to be in solidarity if somebody was trying to quit something else. And I told myself, okay, if you quit what you're doing, I'll quit coffee. And I told myself, I won't drink coffee unless I go to Greece, which I had no plans of going to Greece, so I've been holding on to it. And then now I don't have any desire for coffee, but it took a while. I had headaches, I smelled it, I wanted it still, but I had to stick with it. That's how you do it. And now I don't think about coffee at all. It's just like, whatever. So can we get the first quote? So he talks about this unconscious competent stage where you are no longer an ouch looking for a hurt. That's how he described it. I think that's an awesome way of putting it. He says, rather, your thoughts are now on what you want, and you are beginning to notice how what you desire manifests. Not only are you happier, but also the people around you seem happier. Now, it takes a while to get to that stage, but it sounds lovely to get to the place where you're no longer an ouch waiting for a hurt. So, to give you an example of an ouch waiting for a hurt, I recently learned about this design theory called Atwood's duck. Is anybody familiar with it? Oh, well, you are because you were at the first service. That doesn't count. All right. So Atwood's duck is this design theory, and basically there was this game called Battle Chess, and they were coming out with a new iteration of it, a video game, and the designer knew that if he made it perfect, his producer was going to try to find something wrong with it. And so he decided to embed things in it that the producer would then say, get rid of this, right? And so what he put in it was a little duck. And so the queen in the chess game was always walking around with a little duck that followed the queen everywhere it went. And so it was an annoying feature. So then when the producer was looking at it, he was just like, it's pretty good, but you gotta lose the duck. If you lose the duck, then it's right, it's good. And then he said, oh man, okay, I really like the duck, but okay, I'll remove it. And he removed the duck, and then he got through his process. He embedded complaining into the process because he knew that his producer was going to complain about something. And so in order to control it, he decided he would embed that in the system. So I learned about Atwood's Duck because I posted a video about doing this complaint-free world, and I shared a story about a guy that I used to work with. And this guy, we were both corporate recruiters at the time, and he was like, Pedro, you're working too hard, and you're not giving your customers anything to complain about, which I thought was counterintuitive. And then he said, you can't keep holding this standard because then if you mess up, they're gonna look at you and go like, oh, he's going down. But if you always have something that's a little bit wrong and they always had to complain a little bit, then they'll feel like they've had a part in it. And then if you do it really good a couple times where they don't have to complain, they'll be like, yeah, but you gotta embed that. And I thought, nah, man, that's silly. I'm not gonna do that. I wanna do my best. So he gave me another example. And he said, well, I used to have a paint company and I used to do my best all the time. And my customers still found something to complain about. So I started leaving little patches where I didn't paint here and there that was noticeable so that they could find it. Then I would say, I think I did a pretty good job. Just go over and look around, see if you see anything that needs to be touched up, and I'll do it. Inevitably, the customers find it. He paints it. They go, now it's good. And then he'd say, thank you, customers. And he'd walk off. And he told me, that's what you should do. So I shared that story online. At this point, yesterday I looked, that story had 57,000 views, 2,000 plus likes, 230 comments, and 610 people shared it with other people, which is not super viral, but a lot. And I learned, and people all over industries were saying, I do that, that's in my dentistry, I do that in my design work, I do that. When you buy a new house, they do it on purpose. And I was like, what? I started feeling a little sad about humanity for a second. I'm not gonna lie. And some people one guy who was like, I guess a stickler, wrote me and was like, who is your friend and what is his paint company and where does he work now? And I was like, I'm not giving you that information. But ultimately, it showed me that it's a thing, that complaining is a thing, and some people get to a point of mastery with dealing with other people. They go, I know they're gonna complain about something. Let me give them something to complain about. And so after I felt this kind of like disappointment in humanity, but I didn't want to complain, so I kept it to myself. I didn't want to complain out loud. But once I finished getting over that, I started asking myself, why? Why is that a thing with us? What are we trying to get out of complaining? And what I realized is that complaining is a social currency. It's a way of us exchanging some kind of value with people. It's a way of asking for something. And we do it all the time. There's some of us, like I myself am a direct communicator. I used to be extremely direct communicator and wouldn't explain myself. I would be like, I'm not explaining myself. This is what I thought. That's the end of the question. But now I'm more skilled in the social currency. But I realized that people do it for a reason. Often it's because we're afraid of getting hurt, we're afraid of getting disappointed, and we're afraid of hearing the word no. And so sometimes we'll say things like, well, I know somebody didn't hug me today, and you're asking for a hug. You don't say, can I have a hug? Say, you never hug me. Or, hey, how come you never do this? Or we do all kinds of ways, but we're asking for something. We're asking for connection. And a lot of times we start our conversations off like, how was your day? Well, man, let me tell you, traffic. You know, it's a way of starting off something. And I've learned that some people who are able to navigate humanity very well plan for that. Actually, Jesus said that you have to be wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. And now it makes sense. Because he's like, sometimes, you know, you're dealing with people, you got to know how to move around. And it reminded me of another buddy who told me that whenever he saw his sister, he was a non-complainer. And whenever he saw his sister, he would have a couple complaints with him that he would be prepared to offer her so that he can engage with her. And it only clicked a couple weeks ago. But he said that he would be like, she'd be like, how you doing? He'd go, man, you know, I had a cold a month ago, and it was terrible. And then she would go, oh, yeah. And then she would just take over with the complaining, and he would just sit back and wait and let her run out, you know? And he would tell me, you need to do that. And I started thinking about, you know, why? Why do we do it? We want attention. We live in this attention economy. So we want attention. We want belonging. Sometimes we want credibility. Sometimes we want sympathy. Sometimes we want validation, status, intimacy, and even purpose. Because imagine that producer or a manager at a company, and every employee always does everything perfect. And they have no complaints, nothing to improve on, and they come to work and they go, perfect again. Eventually somebody will say, what do I need you for? You know, they have to have something. But what if we didn't need that? What if we started to create different social currencies? Maybe we took gratitude as a social currency. One of the things that Bowen says in this book is that the opposite of complaint is gratitude. And so what if we decided that gratitude was a social currency? What about curiosity or wonder or presence or stillness or all the things that we desire or all the things that we already are worthy of, but somehow we lost the script? We forgot that we were worthy of these things, and now we feel like we have to ask for things that are already a part of who we are, the reality of who we are. And so we complain or we infer or we do all these things when we don't have to do that anymore. And that's what communities like this are for. They're ways of being able to create a new culture, a new social currency, a new way of relating, a new way of being together that is able to say, hey, I'm trying to be the best person I can be, where you can say to your friend, because some people probably would feel awkward. They don't want to complain, but they don't want to get left out of the social currency. And so they say, they have their bracelet. They go, oh, well, or maybe they don't wear the bracelet anymore because it's like, I don't want to be seen as this. Because I'll tell you for sure, when you start to change your complaining, let me see that next quote. Okay, he says that during this stage, you'll notice how uncomfortable you now feel when someone around you begins to complain. It's as if a very unpleasant odor has suddenly wafted into the room because you spent so much time checking yourself against complaining. When you hear complaints coming from someone else, it's like a clanging cymbal during a moment of sacred silence. That's a very real thing. If you build up your capacity to not complain, you'll start to feel a little weird. And at the same time, people around you who used to exchange that social currency with you will feel like left out, like you're judging them or that you've become boring. I'll tell you a story where that's a big one. My ex told me that. She was, you're so boring, you don't complain. I wish you were like a regular guy and watched football and went out to party. And I was like, okay. Nice complaint. But that happens, right? I had an instance with one of my buddies. Like, I went for years. I should be super Christian. And I was like, oh, man, no, I wouldn't cuss. I wouldn't drink. I wouldn't do anything. And but then I went through this phase where I drank for like 3 months. And then some friends got used to me drinking. Then I decided I didn't want to drink anymore, so I stopped. But my friend asked me to meet him at a bar. And I said, okay. So I was sitting there, and he was drinking. And then he just got mad at me all of a sudden. He's like, man, I said, you're judging me. I know you're sitting here judging me. I said, I'm not judging you, man. And I said, how can I judge you? I was just drinking like a month ago. He's like, no, you're judging me now. I said, I'm not judging you. He said, well, I feel bad because I'm sitting here drinking, and you're not drinking, man. And I just don't feel good about myself. And he was projecting onto me. I said, okay, fine, I'll have a beer, because I wasn't like trying to not drink. I just wasn't drinking anymore. I said, fine, I'll have a beer. So I'm sitting there sipping the beer, and he's talking to me, complaining, telling me some more stuff, and I'm sipping the beer. Then he goes, you know what? This is worse. And I said, what? How's it worse? He said, now you make me feel even more terrible. You see what you're doing to me? And I said, what am I doing, man? He said, you're sitting there drinking a beer in my face. I said, okay, you said me not drinking was bothering you. Now I'm drinking a beer and it's bothering you? He said, yeah, because you're only going to drink one. He said, now you're showing me that I don't have discipline and you're making me feel bad for drinking the one beer. See how it is? And I'm like, okay. But that was the way of the currency. That was the way that he engaged. And he was asking for connection. He was asking for all of these things that he couldn't ask for. He was able to ask for it at a bar to reduce his vulnerabilities by drinking a little bit, but by me not doing the same, he felt like he could not open himself up. And that's what we do on all levels of life. When we don't know who we are, we don't know what we deserve, we don't know how we are a contribution to the world, no matter who we are, just by being here. just by being present. That's who we are. But we've forgotten that. And so we create these spaces and these communities. We take challenges like this. We wear bracelets. We talk about these things. We have book groups. We do all these things not just because we're just trying to improve ourselves, but we're trying to be the reality of who we are, who our souls know we are. And then we live into it without permission, without validation, and then we start to give people permission by being us. And that ends up being our contribution. But in order for us to do that, we have to let some things go. Some things that we've been taught to believe, like the need for catharsis. Can I get the next quote? So this is Bowen quoting Dr. Brad Bushman. He says, catharsis theory holds that expressing anger produces a healthy release of emotion and is therefore good for the psyche, which is another word for soul, by the way. Catharsis theory, which can be traced back through Sigmund Freud to Aristotle, is elegant and appealing. Unfortunately, the facts and findings do not show that venting one's anger has positive value. It harms the self and others. Now, that might not sound right to you because so many times we'll say, I just need to vent. I need to get this out. I need to let this go. But the reality is that these are all mechanistic worldviews where we look at ourselves as machines that need to have venting and this and that and that. It's a mechanistic worldview. We are more than that, actually. And so it may seem counterintuitive not to vent, but the reality is that we are the consciousness that witnesses and is present with and beyond the things that arise within us. And so we witness these things, but we are the consciousness that beholds it. We're not bound to it. But when we look at ourselves as limited beings operating in a mechanistic way, then we're going to function as a mechanistic person. So the invitation of things like this is to step out and step back and witness who we are and the reality of who we are, and that we have power over these things. One of the things that I went through so many phases in my Jesus-y walk, and one of them was where I said, I don't believe in any miracles. I don't believe in miracles at all. I don't care about raising the dead. I don't care about this. I don't care about that. I don't care about resurrection. I don't care about any of it. I do like the teachings, though. And the only miracle that I decided to keep was the idea. It's just like, what miracle is that? Let's turn water into wine because I want to make one. No, it's not that one. The miracle that I wanted to keep was the ability to forgive while in distress. Because in the story, this guy says, forgive them for they know not what they do while they're doing what they're doing. And even though I was struggling with all the other elements, I said, man, now that's a miracle, you know? When somebody, it's hard enough to forgive somebody months, years, weeks after they're doing something, but for somebody to be doing something right to you in the moment and to forgive them. And I said, even if there was no such thing as Jesus, even if somebody made it up and a person was just sitting in their house going, let me make up a story and throw this whole world off. If they just said, forgive them for they know not what they do, and conceived in their mind the possibility of such a transcendent thought, that someone in their body, in that mechanistic way of looking at things, was able to stop and say, even as I'm dying, I forgive you, because the reality of who I am and the reality of who you are is bigger than all of this. I know that what you're doing is because you believe that you are less than. And you believe that if you cast this on me, project this onto me, then you are getting it off of you. Because a lot of times when we vent, we're just trying to get feelings off of us that we don't want. And we're just trying to put it on somebody else. And then that person puts it on somebody else, and then that person puts it on somebody else. But somebody says, you know what? It's ending with me. I'm not participating in that anymore. I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to be like, you don't know what you're doing, and I forgive you. If that was the only miracle of a book that maybe was made up by somebody, it would have been enough. And I think more deeply about it than that now, but I went through that phase. And it showed me that if I could think that thought, then there was potential for all of us to be more than what has happened to us, the worst thing that has ever happened to us, and more than the worst thing that we've ever done, and that we can usher in a new way of being where we live fully as the divine beings that we are in this embodied experience, but using this body as an expression of a love that never fails, never dies, never ends, and that we could all do that. Now, does that seem plausible? Just asking, putting that out there. So next quote from Bowen, please. He said, if you want to improve the world, it must first come from healing the discord within your own soul. Changing your words will ultimately change your thoughts, and this will in turn change the world. I believe this. I've been wrestling with this because I knew before I started reading this book, I was actually nervous about this book because I had come from being a complaint-free person that then learned the social currency of complaining and then was scared what will happen if I go back to being the type of person that didn't complain. I actually went for decades with being an extreme non-complainer. I could have a migraine headache and wouldn't say anything. And this is gonna sound gross, but I actually had a hurt tooth and didn't want to tell anybody to go to the dentist. I pulled the tooth out myself with the pliers, the root and everything. That's extreme. I was an extreme non-complainer, and I'll tell you the story of why. When I was a little kid, I was driving with my mom's boyfriend. He was like a stepdad to me for like 7, 8 years, named Chico. And we were driving in this beat-up pickup truck because he used to put fences together. And he took me with him, let me do a little thing. So he was trying to bond with me, you know? And we drove through this fancy neighborhood, and some kids drove up next to us in a sports car, yelled some racial crap at us, and then told us to get that piece of crap truck off the street. And I was sad, mad, and hurt. And so I said, I hope they crash. Right after I said that, they crashed. They hit the median and hit a sign. Nothing happened to them. They didn't die, but they crashed. And I was just like shocked. My mouth was like how yours is. What happened? And Chico goes, what did you do? Are you a witch? Which then shook me more because I was like, I just witnessed this thing happen. Then this guy I love just called me a witch. And so it freaked me out. And then I'm just like, I don't know. I just said it. I don't know. Then I go home. He tells my mom, do you know what Pedro did today? And then I'm like, what did I do? And then she goes, he said he wished that these guys would crash, and they crashed. And I thought my mom would be like, well, that's just coincidence. And she goes, Pedro, why would you do that? And I said, what? And I was like, I didn't do anything. And she said, you know what it says in Proverbs? Life and death is in the tongue. And she used the Bible on me. And then she told me to look at James 3, which talks about the tongue and how we need to learn how to bridle the tongue. And it talked about how we put a bit in a horse's mouth to control where it goes. And we have to do the same thing with our tongue. And that good water and bad water shouldn't come out of the same well, but with our tongue, we bless and we curse, and that it shouldn't be that way, and that we should choose one. And so I decided to choose one and held myself to an extreme standard for a very long time until I broke. You know, eventually you break. But I held it to a long time. And then I started to play with the social currency of complaining, feeling sorry for myself, and I started bonding with people. And I started to value that. But I realize now that we don't need to do it that way. That we need to just know who we are, know what we deserve, be the light that we are, give our gift, and what we give out will come back to us. This, what we're doing right now, is a gift to the world. To be able to ask for what we deserve and to give it freely, to be able to look at each other and just how we told the kids, we love you, we see the Christ you are, we bless you, those sorts of things, to do that for ourselves and for each other, and then to go out into the world and do the same. Even if it's just a few of us, even if we're just getting started, even if we get to day 20 and we got to start all over again, it's worth the effort to try to be the light that you already are. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to be validated for it. You are it. And so as we prepare to go out into the world, I invite you to just rest with that, to remember that, to be that, and you will see that, and then the world will too. And so it is.